This is the Unregistered podcast, and I'm Thaddeus Russell. This is a show about ideas, people, and behaviors that are considered inappropriate, out of bounds, or beyond the pale. The things you're not supposed to talk about if you're a school teacher, a college professor, a businessman, a politician, a parent, a neighbor, or even a podcast host. These are the things you're not supposed to say or even think if you're a good liberal, a good conservative, or a good citizen. Each week, I'll interview a person who has something bad to say. They might be a journalist or a professor. They might be a porn star or a drug dealer. They might just be an ordinary person with an ordinary job who doesn't care about the rules of polite society. I'm not interested in breaking the rules just to be a troublemaker. I'm interested in people who break the rules of conventional thought and to expand the scope of what is possible to say in our society. I'm interested in people who make me think. In April of 2016, I was flown to Atlanta to be a guest on a podcast that was hosted by Killer Mike, the great rapper of Run the Jewels, who was also at that time emerging as a major public intellectual. Mike's podcast was on the history of Reconstruction after the Civil War, and in particular, the history of Black resistance to white racist violence. So I was flown to Atlanta to be interviewed by Mike for this podcast. It turned out to be one of the greatest conversations I've ever had, and I was so excited to know that this would soon be public. But unfortunately, for many reasons I still don't know, that podcast was never aired, never produced, and no one would tell me why this interview was not being released. For years and years and years, I begged and cajoled the two producers of the show for that audio so that I could release it myself. Well, finally, last week, I heard from one of the producers that I could, in fact, release that audio interview on my own show. And so here it is for Patrons of Unregistered. This is my interview with Killer Mike.
Okay, no, I was just saying Michael Render or Killer Mike, talking to people about interesting facts and historical moments during and post Reconstruction. If you guys have been listening, you guys have heard me say many a time, so where the stories at when black people shot back? And today we brought someone in to talk about it, Thaddeus Russell, who is a history professor and has a book. What's the title?
A Renegade History of the United States.
And I'm going to do a lot more shutting up this time around because you're talking about the stuff that I'm really interested in. I believe that any group of people that are oppressed or enslaved or repressed at all will develop, if they don't already have it, the will to fight or the will to oppress. The human spirit doesn't lie down easily.
Not always, but in this case, it was true, right?
Yeah.
I mean, since the beginning, since really during the Civil War, I mean, black people were fighting back with guns, with knives, with their fists. And that went on for more than 100 years, right?
Yeah.
I think of it as a 100-year war.
Yeah.
In which, you know, we're usually taught that it was a one-sided war, that there were the white oppressors who killed a lot of black people and the black people were victims. Not true at all.
Yeah.
There's never a moment in that 100 years, even at the depths of Jim Crow and lynching, when black people weren't fighting back and often winning, you know. And of course, the big story of that war is that black people ultimately really won, right? After taking a lot of casualties, but they won overall, right? And that's a story that's rarely told for a lot of interesting reasons.
Why?
Great question, which I guess I actually asked myself. Well, okay, I think it has to do with, I'm going to say it, I think it has to do with liberalism. I think it has to do with white liberals who have controlled the academy for about 50 years now. And I think that their politics has been mostly, not entirely, but mostly about making black people into victims so that they, white liberals, can take care of them.
Gotcha.
So, you know, beginning with the Great Society programs, the welfare state in the 1960s, right? That was really the discourse coming out of white liberals was, here's these victims that we need to take care of. We need to raise up and make like us.
Yeah.
right? To assimilate them into our culture, right?
Yeah.
Which to me is a different form of white supremacy.
Gotcha.
Right? Which is not the violent Ku Klux Klan white supremacy. It's the white supremacy of, oh, well, of course you want to be like us because our culture is the best.
It's the Indian school version.
Exactly. Like the Carlisle school. Exactly right.
Yeah.
So applied to blacks beginning with the Civil War. I mean, so with the contraband camps in the Civil War, you had the Union soldiers instituting these rules for the slaves who came there. It said, we're not going to put you up and protect you and give you food and shelter and clothing unless you adopt our rules of behavior, our culture. If you had to be Christians the way we're Christians. You had to be married. That was a rule. You couldn't be taken care of by the Union Army and the contraband camps unless the slaves were married. And a lot of the slaves wanted to be married, but many didn't want to be married.
So the contraband camps are essentially refugee camps.
They were refugee camps for the
enslaved
slaves
Africans that are
who
now
were
escaping.
liberated from the plantations,
Gotcha.
right? And so people think of that as just this wonderful moment where the Union Army is taking care of the slaves, and in part it was because they did offer protection from the Confederates.
Yeah.
But they also had all these rules that were essentially trying to make the slaves white. And that's another major story of Reconstruction that to me is never told or not told nearly enough.
So tell it. I mean, it's worth telling, even, because I want to talk about, of course, the rebellions and things.
Yeah.
But this is, I'm one of those black people who's very pro-Constitution on a lot of things, especially Second Amendment.
Sure.
There's I'm from the South, so there's a fierce history here of hunting, of fishing, and of conservatism. Now, I'm not going to sit here and, push presidential candidates at you as much as I'm saying that prior to the welfare state, what I've learned, because I was raised by people who were born in 1922 and 1932, my grandparents, black people were very self-sufficient. My grandmother was educated not because of public schools, but because of the Methodist Church, because she was Methodist. Her family had been a victim of the Tuskegee experiment, and in the monies that they saved from sharecropping and got from that, they bought their own land. Hence making them sellers to the merchants in the stores there. So, their life was a little different. Wasn't better, but than any other hardworking farming society, but it certainly wasn't. They were no welfare case for anyone. So my grandparents were very adamant about us not being that, and I learned that becoming dependent upon the state was a relatively new thing for black people in the last 40, 50 years only. So I'd like to know more about that as we go into the armed rebellion, because if you're willing to arm yourself and shoot back, you got to be willing, you got to know you can take care of yourself.
Yeah. Oh, wow. I'm already blown away by what you're saying because you don't hear it very often.
It's called the truth.
But I agree with every single word so far. I mean, one of the things, again, that's almost never talked about, although some historians do, is what was lost with integration. Yeah. Right? No one is pro-segregation.
Old black men talk about it a lot in my barbershop.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah, right. Older people know about it and in some ways miss it, segregation era, because of what you were talking about, because there was tremendous black independence. Yeah. There was a thriving black business district in every city in the South.
So it wasn't just Tulsa, it wasn't just Atlanta.
Every single city. You can't. And now, if you go to those cities and go to where those black districts were, they're boarded
ghost
up.
Towns.
Yeah. And so everybody likes to talk about the Negro Leagues. That was very important, and that was one part of it. But again, there were independent black business owners, many of them in every city in the South during Jim Crow. And you had, because of that, when you have economic independence and economic power and economic autonomy, what follows from that? Political power, real power in the streets, and even in many cases in local politics, right? In some cases, you had to get the votes, you had to get the support of those black businesses to become mayor.
Absolutely.
In some way or another. And there was also, those people in the South had guns. Because the South, that's what you were talking about, the conservatism of the South, and in particular views on the Second Amendment in the South, and the lack of gun control in the South, actually played to the favor of black people who were segregated because they had guns that they could use, right? Which they did use. So in those black business districts, you have this economic independence, you have this independent power and autonomy, you have heavily armed people who know how to use those guns because of the hunting tradition, which you talked about.
Absolutely.
And so if you're a Klansman, you could be as racist as you wanted to be. Good luck going into one of those districts and trying to kill somebody.
Absolutely.
Which is what happened. And this is not just me talking, we know this from the evidence. We have lots of evidence over 100 years of black people fighting back in all kinds of ways.
I asked my grandfather, how did he end up in Atlanta, Georgia? His father, he was a child that was abandoned by his father. And his father may have been from Atlanta, but ended up in Atlanta in a neighborhood called Mechanicsville that I'm sure you've heard of. Mechanicsville was a mixed community of skilled laborers that worked one time for the railroads and whatnot. But he was raised in Edenton, Georgia, and at some point he decided that it was wrong for the white guys to be able to cross the tracks and come over to the black side of town and whistle at girls and say hello, and them not be able to cross. Mm-hmm. Not that he was saying whites and blacks shouldn't mix, just like fair is fair. If you guys can come holler at our cousins and sisters, we should be able to do the same thing. My grandfather was a fair-skinned, curly-haired guy. But one day they decided they were going to sabotage, beat the white kids up, and that's exactly what they did. And I found out my grandfather ended up in Atlanta because he got kicked out of Edenton. He essentially got ran out of there, was shuffled out of there by his uncle and mother by in the depths of the night. Train ridden up to New York, got to New York, and came promptly back to Atlanta. I remember asking him, like, why'd you come back? Like, you know, in New York, you're free, essentially. He was like, shit, they were more racist up there than they were back home. So I knew he had a fighter spirit, and I knew other people had. And I knew that it had come out of that tradition of you know, he worked for himself. Essentially, he hunted. He figured a man is a man regardless of color and class. I know guns to some degree made him, upon asking my grandmother why I went there afraid of the Klan, she said, our driveway was 1/8 of a mile long and pitch black at night. My dad was a crack shot who was going to come down it, you know. So these are the lessons I grew up with from the people I grew up with and hearing stories about the Klan. They weren't always terror and terrible. Are there specific stories that you can think of that might have, that we may be interested in hearing that aren't getting told in teaching,
Sure.
in teachings of history in high school right now?
There's too many. We never hear them, but there are too many. Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, everything you're saying about your family is totally consistent with what I've seen in history. Yeah. And the research I've done. So, I mean, one thing that jumps to mind, I've done a lot of research on Alabama and Birmingham and Bessemer in particular.
Yeah, I know Bessemer.
Yeah, and what I did was I looked at the newspapers from those towns in the 50s and 60s, right? And this is, you know, this was considered to be the capital of violent white racism, right?
Yeah.
And it was in many ways, right? But what I found was, you know, newspaper reports almost every single day of blacks violently resisting or just attacking whites on the streets, you know, sometimes defending themselves and sometimes just, I think, who knows, but probably seeking revenge, you know, in various ways. It is not the story that we're told, you know, in Eyes on the Prize and sort of this what I call the civil rights narrative, of, you know, just these black victims and white oppressors, right?
Which is valuable.
Oh, yeah.
But it was a tactic, too. I think that isn't often said enough, that nonviolence as a strategy was a strategy. Right. It became a way of life for Dr. King, but, you know, for the other thousands or so guys, it was just a strategy.
We have to spend a lot of time on that because that's a whole story in itself, and I want to do that. But I just want to tell you about Bessemer for a second. So in the 50s, you know, I'm looking at these story after story after story of black kind of non-respectable, what it was called, resistance, right?
They're Tupacing.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So before Tupac. Not long before, but yeah. So in Bessemer, there was actually a 1 year in the late 50s, there was this sort of panic that took over the white community there, and they called it Push Day. They said, Push Day is coming. And everybody had stayed indoors on Push Day. All the white people in Bessemer stayed indoors on Push Day. They said that Push Day was the day when all the black women were going to push the white people off the sidewalks. Because apparently this had been happening, not in an organized way, and not even necessarily in a mass way, but on the sidewalks in Bessemer, Alabama, at the height of Jim Crow in the 1950s. You had black women asserting their right to that space on those sidewalks, right? In the height of Jim Crow, and often pushing white people out of their way, right? And this is something, again, we never hear about, but it scared white people. This is the point, right? This is like real, this in a sense, this is real black power, right? This is not like controlling office. This is not running for mayor. This is not even desegregation. Yeah. But this is in a way, it's a more profound desegregation, right? Because public space was barred to black people, right?
Absolutely,
so this is like taking that space.
Absolutely.
It's not asking for it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So if you want to talk about the civil rights movement and its connection to this.
Essentially, though, Push Day is an assertion of one's human right.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, yeah.
What I mean by that is the narrative we get told is you had one group of people that were regulated to secondary citizenship, and they humbly accepted it until they couldn't anymore, and then they passively resisted.
Right.
Push Day says, we're two human beings, we're equal. If you attempt to come to my side of the sidewalk, I'm going to push you. or I want your part of the sidewalk, I'm going to push you.
I mean, to me,
but it still is a very human-to-human interaction, whereas usually you hear that one is dominant and one is, that sounds to me as though as I view you as an equal. It doesn't. So I guess in a perverse way, it's a human right, but it still says that it doesn't say I'm afraid of you. I'm trying to get a right. It says I'm asserting a right I already know I have.
Yeah.
That's to be an asshole.
Yeah, I don't disagree with your interpretation of it as a human right, although it's not what I would choose.
I mean, it's not, but it's not the magnificent one that we usually hear about, but it definitely is saying.
I mean, we don't, again, historians, everyone should be careful not to put their ideas into people in the past. You know, I mean, we don't know exactly what was in their minds, but to me we
know they were tired of walking on the sidewalk and having to stop.
Probably.
Walk by.
Probably, yeah. And to me, so like I said, to me it was simply seizing that space.
Got you.
Just taking it. I don't know what was in their minds, but they took that space, and that's number one. Number two, it was, to me, the message was loud and clear to whites, because this is how the whites responded was, don't fuck with me.
Yeah.
Right? And again, this is Bessemer, Alabama in the 1950s, right?
Yeah.
So,
but you can't do that if you don't own your own stores. I would imagine if you don't have your, you can't. You gotta,
right.
You gotta,
I mean, they had a place to go to.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying. If you don't have a way to fortify yourself of sorts.
In a way, it's a fortress.
So essentially, you find that people are kind of more assertive, I guess, when they have their own resources too.
Yeah.
So with the liberalization of the civil rights movement and post-civil rights movement. And the changing of the narrative that resistance happened at all beyond even armed resistance before we get there. Push Day just sounds like resistance, period. Like resistance is happening. Before we get to that, like, what is it? I guess I've always wondered, what was black life from the start of Jim Crow until about when I became aware, when I first started hearing stories of civil rights, it's really from the early 50s. That's when my grandmother first starts kind of telling her stories. At that time, she's about 19, 20 years old. So she lands in Atlanta. So her stories kind of start here. And she goes back to Alabama, to do the march and stuff. But they were pretty much segregated to their own side, and they were happy with that when she lived in Alabama on a farm.
So she participated actively in the civil rights movement?
Yeah, she did.
Yeah, so this is another thing, this is something I want to correct, not for what you're saying, but what is often taught us, which is that all black people participated in the civil rights movement in the South, right?
No.
So if you look, and this is not a knock on the civil rights movement or on black people in the South, but we first of all have to be clear that a tiny, tiny minority of black people in the South participated. Yeah. Okay, went to the march. If you count, you can go and look at all the major events, all the sit-ins, all the marches, all that stuff. You count all the people who were there, it's less than 1% of the black population of the South. Okay, so, but what I want to say, and what I've been saying, what is far more important is the kinds of resistance like Push Day that was much more common. Yeah. Right? That happened all the time in all sorts of ways.
There was an undercurrent of resistance, period.
Yeah. Some historians have called that the hidden transcript of resistance.
Got you.
Yeah.
What are some other instances?
Well, so armed resistance, the use of guns, the use of violence was integral to the civil rights movement from the beginning. And we're just now starting to write that history.
How?
And in fact, Charles Cobb is someone you should have on this show. He wrote a recent fantastic book on this.
Charles Cobb.
Yeah, he's a historian in Massachusetts.
Yes, sir.
And I reviewed his book. It's a wonderful book.
What's the name of it?
It's got a great title. It's called This Nonviolent Stuff Will Get You Killed.
I love that.
Yeah, no, you'll love it. It's your book. Yeah, you'll love it.
I love it.
Yeah,
that's a T-shirt already.
Yeah, it's a fantastic book. So he looks at the armed resistance of blacks beginning during Reconstruction.
Okay.
And takes it all the way through the civil rights movement. Most of the book is on the civil rights movement. What Cobb shows, and what other historians have shown, so he's not the first, but he does it the best, is that the civil rights movement was dependent upon crazy Negroes with guns, which is what they were called, right? And sometimes called something worse than that.
Negroes is a fancier name for it.
Yeah, it was either crazy Negroes or bad niggers, right?
Yeah, exactly.
The point about crazy Negroes and bad niggers is that they all had guns,
let me tell you,
and were willing to use them against white people.
One of the funniest things I've ever heard, man, is Andrew Young tell me. He said, yeah, NWA. I didn't even have any idea Andrew Young knew who in the hell NWA were. He said, niggas with attitudes. Yeah, that's what they used to call us. And I was thinking to myself, yeah, y'all had the attitudes, but them other niggas had the guns.
Exactly. Yeah,
that's the big difference.
And the Andrew Youngs of the world were not fans of the bad niggers.
I know.
We definitely want to talk about too.
But needed, right? Because if I'm Lyndon Baines Johnson, I'm thinking to myself, I can negotiate with these well-spoken group of young men here, or I can negotiate with those well-spoken young men there with 12-gauge shotguns.
Exactly.
So
this is amazing. So yeah, that was King's letter from Birmingham jail, was the argument you just stated. That's what he says in that letter. No one ever talks about that, really. So here's a story of Birmingham that no one knows. Mm-hmm. Okay, so everybody knows about the fire hoses and the dogs, Bull Connor, 1963, the nice black school children in their Sunday best walking down the street getting marched into paddy wagons. Everybody knows that. Everybody knows that. That is not the story.
What is the TMZ version? Come on, Professor.
So the story is that for years and years before that, there was basically an ongoing black rebellion in the streets against the cops.
Gotcha.
And against the Klan.
Gotcha.
And against white racists generally, and against segregation. Like black people just going to the zoo they weren't supposed to go to. Like black people going to the amusement park they weren't supposed to go. Black people drinking out of the fountain they weren't supposed to drink out of. Black people walking on sidewalks they weren't supposed to be walking on.
There's one thing about people who got money.
Yep.
They feel they deserve every right everybody else does.
And what else is going on in American culture and in the South in the 1950s and early 1960s in terms of popular culture? What's going on? Rock and roll, which was invented by black people and played by black people, including across the South in all those big bad cities like Birmingham and Atlanta and all the rest of them, right?
Circuit.
So Chuck Berry would go play in some segregated city in the South, and what would happen? All these white girls would show up wanting to have sex with him.
That is one of the perks of being a rock and roll singer.
And so the Klan at one point actually tried to storm the stage and killed Chuck Berry because of this, right? And he was no fan. People were no fans of his among the white establishment in the South. But you had this sort of also this fascinating movement of whites toward black culture and black people and sort of a different kind of integration, an integration that was voluntary and that was based on desire and pleasure.
Like it happened during the jazz era.
Exactly.
Like what happened during hip hop's era.
Exactly, yeah. So that's going on at the same time, and that's also an assertion of black power and black autonomy and all that, right? So this resistance had been going on in the streets, but what I found in my research on Birmingham was police reports of resisting arrest by black people who were just fighting the cops. I'm talking about Bull Connor's racist cops in the streets, women often in particular, with sometimes guns, sometimes knives, but often just with their fists, with their fingernails, with their teeth.
I am definitely here to tell you black women get pissed.
Yep. And they sure did then. Yeah. And again, you always think, oh, Bull Connor's police in the Birmingham, that you think, oh, God, they were invincible. No, not at all. And so you see this across the board. You see it in all the newspaper reports from that time, right? You see ordinary black people, not civil rights leaders, just ordinary black people just fighting. And it's, again, asserting their right to the space, right?
I'm very glad you mentioned the fact that much of the physical resistance had been from women. Oftentimes, women aren't accredited with proper place in terms of planning and strategy with our emancipation period. But to hear that even on a ground level, that resistance happened even in a physical way from women is very telling. I mean, of course, if you know the history of Jamaica, you know about the Maroons that were a force in the mountains of Jamaica that resisted British rule, led by a woman. You hear about other places where you've seen African resistance period to colonialism and oppression has been women led. So thanks. I just wanted to make that point while we're talking, because it doesn't get made enough. You hear about Sojourner, you hear about Harriet, but you don't hear about those women that were on the street pushing back.
Yeah, we know about black women who were slaves who may or may not have killed white babies.
Talk about that.
In retaliation.
Talk about, because people always say, I'm gonna be very honest. People of my age, I'm 40 years old, so I came up in the middle of the hip hop's Black Power moment. You know what I mean? I can remember some of the more harsh speakers. Mm-hmm. Khalid Muhammad in particular was infamous for saying in regards to South Africa, kill the men, kill the women, kill the babies. You think that's shocking to hear, even if you agree or don't agree with it. It's so shocking you can be put back. But you say to yourself, like, if I'm enslaved and in charge or in care of my oppressor's child, would I have taken the child out? So I'm interested to hear if you have any.
Yeah, so a lot of my analysis was inspired by black nationalism.
Yeah.
And, the Nation and Malcolm and all that. It's a very different way of looking at race relations. And, and when whites use that analysis, it opens up this whole new world of viewing the history of American race relations. But yeah, so on the plantations during slavery, One of the points I like to make, and again, people don't like to hear it at first, but when they hear what's behind it, they do like it, which is that whippings were far less common than we believe. Now, they did happen.
Yeah.
For sure. No one disputes that, but they happened far less often. And rapes of slave women happened, for sure, but far less often than we are led to believe. Why? If the slave owners had unlimited power, why wouldn't they rape and whip their slaves all the time? They didn't, because they did not have unlimited power over their slaves, right? They understood, first of all, that you can't whip someone forever and ever and ever and expect them to do any work.
Absolutely.
Right? You can't whip them nearly to death and expect it. So they saw there was diminishing returns in the use of punishment, right? Number one. Number two, with rape, it definitely happened, but most of the major planters in the South actually counseled against it, and they fired a lot of their overseers who raped their slaves because they understood if you rape this woman who's living on your plantation right next door to you and is most likely taking care of your children, it's not such a good idea to make her mad at you.
Yeah.
And so we do have accounts, we do have testimony, we do have evidence of slave women taking revenge on their masters and their overseers.
And what would that revenge be?
Sometimes putting ground glass in the food that they served them. Sometimes the white baby wouldn't wake up in the morning.
Yeah.
Sometimes they just punched the mistress in the face.
Yeah.
And we have testimony of this. We know this is true, right? So there was, even in slavery.
There is such, you gotta understand, I only know this because of African Americans' griot tradition. I only know this because I was raised by people in the Deep South.
Oral tradition.
Yeah, from an oral tradition. Griot to essentially just stories, just talk, for people listening to me. Just essentially it's your grandparents and your great-grandparents telling you their reality and their version of the truth. Now, I have told friends this over the years because my grandfather told me, and my grandmother later opened up and told these type of stories to me. And my friends are always kind of hesitant, like, yeah, okay, I hear you. But, but I'm like, if my grandfather was born in 1922, his parents are born in the hundreds, and they have a far different stories from what their grandfathers and grandmother and told them. So the fact that you're saying is, for some people, is the first time in their life. The first time in their life they are hearing this. They are hearing that this type of resistance, overt or passive, happened at all. So and married that with what you just talked about, the liberal agenda of kind of keeping people passive and at bay. It does to me sounds like, even with a 100-year war of resistance, that one, slavery, it seems to be getting traded for another. And ultimately it seems that the slave masters saw fit to not punish all the time for the better domestication of slaves and use them as chattel. It seems that politically almost the same thing seems to be happening there, or socially, the social contracts that blacks kind of are a part of that keep them there. But yet you don't have that spirit of resistance. It's just we're just making that observation. Just because again, this information has just never been heard. This will be the first time. Yeah,
the black oral tradition, or black folklore in particular, right, is really important source for historians. And again, it's not, you don't take any folklore, any oral tradition as statements of fact, right? You have to take it all with a grain of salt, of course, because this is just passed down through generations, whether it's black people or white people or whoever talking. One of the things that you see, though, in black folklore, and many historians have written about this, is the bad nigger being this recurring figure, recurring dominant figure in it, right?
The tradition of Stagger Lee.
And many others. And there were female versions of Stagger Lee as well.
I didn't know that.
Black folklore. Sure.
Can we talk about them?
Yeah. Well, I mean, so it was like the kind of the Jezebel figure, but not with that racist connotation.
Gotcha.
Who was, resistant to white, often sexually powerful. Yeah. And sexually powerful over black men and white men.
Gotcha.
Who got her way. And so then where you find that ultimately showing up is in the Pam Grier movies in the 1970s, right?
God bless her.
So she's part of that long tradition. And there were a lot of those movies that were very, very popular, made a lot of money, right? And she kicked everybody's ass, right? Yeah. She ruled over white cops, black men, everybody.
It almost sounds like Tarantino's version of history is a little more accurate than people want to give him credit for.
It sure is. I mean, it is. I mean, certainly that part of it, yeah. And so, I mean, Tarantino would be the first to tell you that he he borrows greatly from blaxploitation, which I hate that term because it doesn't make any sense to me, because the so-called blaxploitation movies of the 70s is all about black people exploiting everyone else.
Yeah.
Right?
It sounds kind of cool to say it, but I agree.
I mean,
those
movies are amazing. You know, if you,
I was watching Superfly last night.
I think Superfly has perfect politics.
Yeah,
perfect politics. What happens with Superfly at the end? Like, he defeats the white cops.
Yeah.
He makes all the money. Yeah. And he leaves the game.
Yeah, absolutely.
And he's off free and rich.
Absolutely.
You know?
I hated black movies that came later, like in the 80s and 90s, where the bad black guy got locked. Like Training Day, I didn't really want Denzel to die, but hey, it happens. Right. He's still a cop, so I had to respect it. But I hated that morality came in later, and we kind of had to be the good guy. I liked when the grad guy got away, like Willie Dynamite.
Yep.
Penitentiary, even. I like those movies.
Yeah. I love blaxploitation movies, and I teach them all the time in my classes.
Really?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Oh, yeah. They're essential. I mean, it's like the last gasp of what we're talking about, of that kind of black resistance. And it's not just resistance. I hate using just resistance, because resistance is sort of just a negative.
It really is an assertion of your human right.
It's not just negative. It's not just a negative. Yeah. It's also saying, I want this, and I'm going to take it.
Yeah. It's not saying I'm here too. It says I'm here. To say I'm here too, you're already being imposed upon. But when you say I'm here, I have as much right to be here.
Yeah, and I also don't like the assertion that it was about equality, because I don't. To me,
that's always been weird to me too.
People
Professor.
Don't care about equality. They just want this thing that's in front of them.
It's always been weird. Who are you to be equal to?
Right?
I always wanted to say that.
I got to tell you this. So Vine Deloria, American Indian author, novelist, writer, political activist, always said, I don't want equality with the white man, because equality always means sameness.
Absolutely.
It means making us like them.
Absolutely. And essentially, that's what we were talking about in reference to the schools, in reference
to
Carlisle schools,
Indian
in reference
schools.
to the liberalization of Black America.
Yeah. So let's go back to Reconstruction.
Let's go back.
That's a perfect segue.
I like talking to you.
Good, man.
Yes,
I love talking to you. This is amazing. It's usually when I have these conversations about these topics, I got to clear away all this brush before I can even get to it.
Nah, let's just.
You know what I mean? Like, you're just ready. You're there already. I don't have to do anything.
They say when the student is ready, the teacher will teach. You have a willing student today.
Well, you've clearly done a lot of your own work getting there. So I mean, it's usually you've done all the work for me. So Reconstruction. Here's something that's almost never talked about with Reconstruction.
Yes, sir.
There were several thousand schools that were established by the Freedmen's Bureau during Reconstruction. Everybody celebrates those schools because they taught the ex-slaves how to read and write and do arithmetic. And that's true. They did. And that is a good thing.
Are we talking about the schools that later became historically black colleges and universities?
Well, some of them did. Some of them did. Not all. But yeah, the Freedmen's Bureau schools, there were about 4,000 of them established across the South by the Freedmen's Bureau during Reconstruction.
Got you.
They taught the ex-slaves in those schools reading, writing, and arithmetic, which was great. Everybody likes that. The ex-slaves loved it. They wanted that too. Here's what's almost never talked about. In those schools, they also gave them tremendous moral lessons. They read aloud to the ex-slaves, who were all illiterate, from these books that were written by northern white abolitionists who were Christian assimilationists who wanted to make the slaves into white Christians.
Yeah.
So they taught them these moral lessons. Here are the moral lessons. Stop drinking. Stop smoking. Yeah. Save all your money. And most importantly, work all the time. And even in your leisure time, use your leisure time to take care of your family. Now, I know you're a big proponent of Booker T. Washington and the work ethic and family. Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with that.
I also like strip clubs and marijuana.
See, there's the thing. Okay, so if Reconstruction were fully successful, you would not exist.
Okay.
Because what the leaders of Reconstruction, the teachers in those Freedmen's Bureau schools, the leaders of the Union Army who ran the contraband camps, all of them, the white leaders, and many of the black leaders too, by the way, said over and over again, the culture that you have developed as slaves that was distinctive, different, and in many ways freer than the dominant white culture. Because remember, slaves were inventing this music that became blues and jazz and rock and roll.
Absolutely.
Right? And had different ideas about marriage and
they
sexuality.
They had transformed Christianity.
They had much looser ideas about sexuality and marriage and all that stuff and divorce. They said, the leaders of Reconstruction said to the ex-slaves very clearly, you've got to give all that up if you want our protection. You've got to
Got
give
you.
all of your own distinctive culture up if you want to become citizens of the United States.
Got you.
Because citizenship, they said, and they were right, comes with a major price, which is your culture. Right? You have to become just like us. If the Union Army is going to protect you against the Confederates, against the Ku Klux Klan, if you're going to get equal protection under the law, if you're going to be considered full American citizens.
Absolutely. Now, to be fair, have we required that of Japanese immigrants, of Chinese immigrants, of Italian immigrants later, of Eastern European immigrants? Have we required? Okay.
Yes.
So to be fair,
including people who look like me.
This country has required this of
Who
every
look
immigrant
just like
population.
me,
Okay.
who were considered to be black.
Yeah.
Believe it or not, I don't know if you know the story about Jews and Italians and Irish, but they were considered to be either, there was a debate when they first got here.
My East Indian friends tell me about this, that their parents, when they first got here.
So the Irish, the Italians, and Jews, when
Uh-huh.
they first got here, this is for the Irish, it was the early 19th century. For the Italians and Jews, it's the turn of the 20th century. Were considered to be either black, Negro, or apes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So they were either considered to be equivalent to blacks socially and were treated that way, or actually in some cases inferior to blacks.
Yeah.
So
Because
the
blacks
Irish
had economic power at that point.
So the Irish were considered, they're still called the niggers of Europe.
Yeah.
Or sometimes you've heard that, or the blacks of Europe, right? They were definitely considered that in the 19th century.
Yeah.
And many Europeans and the English called the Irish chimpanzees too.
Wow.
And they were barred from jobs. They were discriminated against when they got here to New York and Philadelphia in the early 19th century, right? What they did, the Irish, was they organized themselves to assimilate really quickly and really radically. So they did several things, the Irish did. One was they stopped dancing.
Okay.
The Irish were co-inventors of the tap dance,
Gotcha.
tap dancing with blacks, right? In the Five Points area of New York City in the 1830s and 1840s, you have all these sort of what were basically clubs or bar saloons.
These were people who sang Gangs of New York. He's
yes,
talking
this
about
is Gangs of New
area.
York. Yes, so you have Irish and blacks hanging out together, often living together.
Yeah.
Often having sex together, often having children together, all that stuff, living in the same neighborhoods, right? And they're co-creating kind of an urban party culture, which we still have. I mean, you can see if you trace the origins of hip hop, it really begins there.
Yeah.
And so what they did was the leaders of the Irish Catholic Church, Irish Catholic immigrant leaders, said to their people, stop dancing, stop hanging out with those black people, move out of the neighborhood, become racist, right? So in the 1860s, you have the draft riots in New York City where the Irish are basically lynching black people on the streets randomly, right?
Yeah.
And they become sort of just in terms of their discourse, what they're saying and through their political leaders, they're just becoming anti-black racists, right? For the first time. This is new. They also joined the police forces in large numbers. It's a great way to prove that you're a good citizen.
I was going to ask about that.
Yep. That's why we have all those Irish cops, right? Still to this day. And the fire departments, right? The Irish flood into the fire departments. They join the military. They serve in the Mexican-American War in the 1840s and the Civil War in the 1860s. They prove their citizenship. They prove that they are good American citizens.
Yeah.
Boring, puritanical, non-dancing, non-drinking, sort of.
Can't get an Irishman to not
with
drink.
families, nuclear families and all that, and all the rest of it. And by the turn of the 20th century, the Irish are considered not only to be white, they are considered to be the best whites, the Nordics. There was actually a hierarchy among white people. And I'm talking about, this is what professors at Harvard and Yale and major intellectuals were teaching. Yeah.
Wow.
They were taught at that time, at the turn of the 20th century, that white people from Europe were divided into 3 separate races.
Okay.
And that some of those races were better than others. So the Nordics were the top. They're the best. That's
Gotcha.
Northern Europe. And then the Alpines were from the Central Europe. They were okay. They could be
Gotcha.
farmers. You could let them in,
Gotcha.
but don't let them be president.
Gotcha.
And the Mediterraneans, who are from Southern Europe,
Italians,
no
Spain.
good. All Italians, Spanish, Greeks, especially Italians, who are
Closer
coming.
you got to Africa.
Yeah, and the Jews. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And the Jews were kind of lumped in with the Mediterranean, with the
Gotcha.
Mediterraneans too,
Because
they were considered.
they
They were black. They were considered to be basically black.
Gotcha.
Yeah, that group. There was a debate whether, again, they were sort of like a separate terrible race or they were just Negroes.
Gotcha.
But basically, they were considered to be bottom of the structure.
So again, this is as I've grown in this wonderful country of mine that I actually love a lot, honestly.
Well, it's always a love-hate relationship, isn't it?
It is. Yeah. It has to be with black people interested. But you know what? Just like more like your asshole cousin, more like a love. Let me watch him because he'll do anything. You know. But I kind of lost my thought there. Basically, what am I thinking? Oh, in regards to America, it seems that our class system is also cast by color, and people I'm seeing have the ability to jump or hopscotch over black people. Black people have gained a lot post Reconstruction in terms of segregation worked for them in that their dollar turned in their community more. They were willing to assert themselves, everything from a push day and even back to while enslaved. Acts of rebellions or assassinations have happened. So whites had to be cautious in how that essentially seems to be a labor corporation dispute, almost like a boss labor dispute. Like you got to watch how you negotiate with labor because they could knock your whole family off. This is just a radically different history, and I'm really enjoying hearing it. Not for death on either side, but I think it's important that people understand that the resistance happened. I think it's important that people understand that it's natural too. And even beyond like armed resistance, it seems as though blacks were economically more willing to assert their power. It seems as though at certain points between Reconstruction and let's say the Civil Rights Movement, that even from the Harlem Renaissance, you almost had a more aggressive intellectual community in terms of showing up or showing out or proving that we're here. How has it changed post civil rights? How has black gun ownership and the perception of per se? How has black intelligence versus the standard played out post? Because it seems to be really rebellious in the stuff you've been talking about this morning.
Yeah, well, that's still going on. Before I forget, I realized I didn't finish the Birmingham story.
Okay.
But I absolutely want to talk about that too.
Got you.
So you have, leading up to 1963 in Birmingham, you have this long history of intense black resistance, often violent against white racists, against the white cops in Birmingham. And the establishment and the police force in Birmingham was well aware of this. We don't know it now because it's been covered up in history, but they were well aware of it. So what happens is King and the SCLC calls this demonstration in Birmingham where they got all their children out and dressed them in their Sunday best and walked non-violently down the street right into the paddy wagons, and Bull Connor closed the door on the paddy wagons and sent them off to jail.
Yeah.
We know that. What we are told in the histories is that Bull Connor loosed the fire cannons and the water cannons and the dogs on those children. That is not true. What happened was a call went out on the black radio station in the days before that protest that it was going to happen. And what happened was the day of the protest, hundreds or maybe thousands of just ordinary black people who were not affiliated with King or the SCLC or the Civil Rights Movement just showed up at the park, at Kelly Ingram Park.
That's right.
They just showed up and they circled that park. And those people were not nonviolent. They weren't respectable. They weren't nice, right? What they did was they threw bricks and bottles and cans and rocks
Absolutely.
At the police.
Absolutely.
At Bull Connor's police force, right?
Absolutely.
And those are the people that Bull Connor sicked the dogs on. The first the first German Shepherd that was sent out by Bull Connor went at a black man who had thrown a bottle at the cops.
Yeah.
The cops sustained 6 casualties, no deaths, but they were sent to the hospital. There were 6 of those cops who were sent to the hospital before all that went down. Bull Connor was forced to turn the hoses and the dogs on those people because of the history of black violent resistance in Birmingham. Now, if that had not happened, we may never have heard of Martin Luther King.
Yeah.
He would have been the first. He did admit that without those people, because in the letter of Birmingham jail he says it, without those people, he would have gained no fame. The event would have gained no notoriety.
Absolutely.
No one would have paid attention to it. Bull Connor would not have been shamed nationally, which he was, right? That was the turning point of the civil rights movement. It was because of those bad black people who came there and were violent.
Oh, man, them Alabamians. Because they got King out of Atlanta.
Yeah.
Like him and his cute ideas. And a lot of people don't know that. A lot of people, from my city or they like taking pride in, yeah, we have Dr. King. But when he started talking crazy, like he wasn't just a college student anymore, they said, there's Alabama, have a good time there.
So King goes to jail. He writes the letter from Birmingham jail. And in that letter, and everyone can read it, he says, it's a letter to the white establishment of Birmingham. He says to them, you have a choice, is what you were saying. You have a choice. You can deal with me and my business suit and my Christian values and my nice wife.
Absolutely.
Or you can deal with those crazy Negroes in the street.
With the overalls and the guns.
And you'll have to deal with, if you don't deal with me, not just those crazy Negroes in the street, you're going to have to deal with the people that they're going to gravitate toward, who are named Malcolm X and the Nation of Islam.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Right. And so what happens just a few days later, the white establishment of Birmingham sits down with King and desegregates the whole fucking city.
Yeah.
Writes an agreement desegregating the city. I'm telling you, without those bad people in the streets, it wouldn't have happened.
So without those bad people in the street and some economic sanctions, because the
boycotts.
The boycotts, because there was another black bus company or something, right? They were set to cripple them, potentially from a financial standpoint. So between a bunch of bad niggas and keeping the money in the community, it seems that answers and results happened.
Yeah. We see the Chamber of Commerce of Birmingham saying right after that, we had to do this because we couldn't have people fighting in the streets anymore if we're going to have business in Birmingham.
Gotcha.
They said, the Chamber of Commerce of Birmingham said right after that, no, we desegregated, not because we're nice or we like black people, but we have to operate business here, and it can't happen if we have these crazy people fighting each other.
So violence, just like nonviolence, has been an effective strategy in organizing black people.
It's been very effective. Yeah, and then if you want to look at police brutality, and the history of police brutality, and you want to look at welfare going into the cities, this is all post-civil rights, right? Look at the riots. So you have major riots in 1964, 1967, 68.
Yeah.
Watts, Harlem, Newark, Detroit. And you will see several things that happen pretty much right after those riots. One is welfare starts flowing. Welfare money from the federal government and the state government starts flooding into those communities.
Yeah.
People just start getting paid because of it.
Gotcha.
Now, I'm a critic of the welfare state and of the strings that were attached to the people who were getting it, which I'm no fan of, but it did help a lot of people in many ways. There were people getting checks in the mail, literally, in the 60s because of those riots. Number one. Number two, the white, explicitly, clearly racist cops who precipitated those riots through acts of police brutality were fired, and black police officers were hired in large numbers in all those cities for the first time. Okay. No, again, Ice Cube let all the white people in the world know that black cops are not wonderful necessarily either.
Yeah.
But that was a tremendous change, right? For the first time, those cities had black cops in them. Okay, that's another direct result of the riots.
I tell people, after Ferguson, our community is still very much split on whether it was effective or not. I have a rapper friend up there, Tef Poe, who's been a wonderful organizer on the ground. And I say, they got 2 black city council members now. And they got to cut, I think the prosecutor, whoever the guy was that was talking on television, had to resign, and there's change happening, and you hope you see more black cops there, but you can't ever say riots don't work when you see them working. That's one thing about, I'm not a proponent for a violence first policy, but it's hard to ignore the language of, it's hard to ignore something burning, and it's hard to, because once you do, you just say, I see it and I don't care. Not even that I don't care about it in a I'm a nice person way, but I don't care to solve the problem, and I know there's a problem. So I too am not a proponent for the welfare state. I have my criticisms in regards to it because I think that it's made parts of my community and parts of any community so dependent that you essentially become it's a pacifier. It's a political pacifier, so you won't want what you truly deserve.
I think it's worse than that. Yeah, I mean, I think, anyone who's been on welfare knows that what happens is you have these social workers coming into your house.
Controlling your life for pennies.
And monitoring your behavior.
Yeah.
And counting exactly how much money you spend on this, this, and this.
And
telling you what you shouldn't spend money on.
Yeah. And deciding what things like what medicines your children take. Deciding when you come and go. Deciding where you go. Deciding how much you can decide to achieve based on the amount of money you have.
Yep.
Absolutely.
The roots of that are in Reconstruction. So that's the Freedmen's Bureau's. That was the Freedmen's Bureau's project, was to remake black people. You give them this money, this aid, this material support, right?
Yeah.
But in exchange, you say to them in many, many ways, you got to change your behavior. You got to be different.
Yeah.
2000, in the year 2000 in Cincinnati, there was a major riot in protest of an act of police brutality, right? Ask anybody in this country who knows about law enforcement about the Cincinnati Police Department since 2000, and they will tell you the Cincinnati Police Department, even though the university just killed someone recently, but the actual city police department is probably the best in the country.
Wow.
Yeah. This is well known among law enforcement people that they instituted wide-ranging, deep reforms in that department because, and they will tell you, because of that riot in 2000.
Yeah.
Right. The thing about Mike Brown that drives me crazy, not about him, but about what people say about him, that drives me crazy, and Black Lives Matter people in particular, even though I'm, of course, in sympathy with them, is that, okay, so we did find out that Mike Brown did attack that cop. Okay, let's instead of ignoring that or pretending he didn't do that, let's think about that for a second. Okay, first of all, as you were saying, Ferguson and the responses to it have got everybody in this country talking about police brutality for the first time.
Absolutely.
White people, for the first time in large numbers, are talking about it, caring about it. Reforms are being instituted.
Absolutely.
Cops are getting indicted for shooting people in the back for the first time, right? Cops are getting fired for the first time.
Yeah.
You know? He did clearly attack that cop. To me, that makes him a hero. A martyr. I mean, I wouldn't recommend that to my own son.
Yeah.
I would never tell my own son to do that.
That's a hell of a perspective coming from a white man.
Well, look what happened.
Yeah.
So I think of Ferguson, and if you read the report, the Department of Justice report on Ferguson, that city was under occupation.
Absolutely it was.
That's what it is.
Absolutely.
Right? And so, of course, a kid who's 18 or 19 years old growing up in that is going to see the police as an occupying force.
Yeah. I'll give you Mike from this perspective. I also saw it. I also saw him as a martyr, but for a different reason. I saw him as an American citizen engaged by a policeman illegally.
Sure.
Because when it stopped, there wasn't a call when he was stopped.
Now
that said
again,
that he had stolen anything. And again, no cop has any right to stop you going and coming without suspicion.
And we know that was happening every single day.
Yeah, we know it was happening in that community. We know it happens in communities across the world. So, for me, whether he stole anything, whether he really attacked the cop or not, because the cop was an occupying force or not, a cop stops an American citizen illegally. At that point, everything else is on the cop, to me, simply because I want the same rules and rights to apply to me constitutionally. And again, I talked to Jane Elliott. I don't know if you know who that is. Jane Elliott was a primary school teacher when Dr. King was assassinated. She created an experiment called the blue eye brown eye experiment. Mm-hmm. I talked to her. I called her just out of nowhere. Cole called her about a month ago, and I've been talking to her since. And when we were speaking, she tells me, she gives me advice. I say, how do I get white people to understand this? Because the key to teaching white people is, white people, you don't want to make them more afraid than they already are. Because a lot of stuff that comes out of white society is from fear, honestly enough. And that's the scary part, because scary people to kill you, help me teach these lessons. But she says to me that most of the things I've learned, Mike, I've learned from black people. So pay attention to black people and the older black people that are talking to you. But she says it's important that you communicate to white people that black men are walking around with post-traumatic stress disorder simply by living in a society that we create and that we allow to oppress them daily. They are occupied by police. They're not safe in their neighborhoods. And the more she said it, it was like a weight was being lifted off me, because finally someone who doesn't look like me understands. You know what I mean? Like sincerely understands. Like when people say, well, my father was a police officer and he taught me how to communicate with police officers. I've taught my sons and my nephews that. But most human beings are having a bad day. They just don't want you effing with them. So if they give tood back to a cop, the fact that a white guy has a better chance of surviving that encounter than a black guy shows you that my life means less. And it does have you walking around tense. So even if the kid attacked, like you say, the kid was attacking something he perceives as an occupying force and not someone who's there to protect and serve on the behalf of him, his mother, or any of his siblings.
They were extorting the black community there. They were taking money from them in fines every single day.
Absolutely.
It was mass extortion by the police force.
And municipalities are doing this all around the country.
And mass harassment.
Yes.
Yeah.
I live in North Fulton County now. I have never seen a roadblock.
Yeah, right.
I have never seen I live 14 minutes from here.
Yep.
I have never seen a roadblock.
Sure.
I own properties and business in Southwest Atlanta. I can pretty much tell you when the roadblocks are going to be there and what time they're going to be there. Our municipality in this great county is funded by tickets from people who live in working class black communities.
Sure.
And it's like that all over the nation. No one says anything.
I'm a big critic of the Department of Justice under Eric Holder, but I got to say, they did us a great service with that report on Ferguson, because we saw clearly that that's what's going on.
Yeah.
The
kids that were
it's not just relying on this or that black person telling us, complaining about the police.
Yeah.
This was detailed account of what the Ferguson Police Department was doing to those people.
So those kids that are in the street right alongside my homie Tough Poe up there, that young man who threw that smoke or tear gas grenade back when we were after the Rodney King decision on the AUC campus right here in Atlanta, as high school kids going over there to throw bricks and rocks and fight. This is pretty par for the course. Mm-hmm. Black people, you're pretty normal.
Yeah.
Black people, you do pretty much what any other oppressed group of people do. If a tank's coming down the street and all you have is a rock, you throw it at it.
Yeah.
You have not been a passive group of people rescued by white liberals in the 60s and now are simply there to be pacified until it's time to come out and vote.
Right. I don't think it's a stretch to compare black people in neighborhoods like that to Palestinians.
I was going to say that, but I was waiting for you to catch
it's a military occupation. It really is. You deal with law enforcement on a regular basis if you're a black person in a poor neighborhood in this country.
Absolutely.
Like a Palestinian kid would, And so, no kidding, their attitude toward law enforcement and authority and police is different than white people's attitudes.
Absolutely.
That they see them as an occupying force, not as people there to help them.
Absolutely. You're as frustrated as I am. Like that
But thank God for Mike Brown, right?
Yeah.
Who actually finally, I think white people are finally learning this because of him.
Yeah.
And not because of him, but because of the response to what happened to him, right? And so again, let's please don't say hands up, don't shoot anymore. That didn't happen. He did something better.
Yeah.
It's not better, but he did something that was more meaningful in some ways. He fought back. Now again,
Trayvon also, even though that wasn't a cop, what I took out of that was that I talked about I was having a gun argument with a friend of mine and said, well, what good would a gun have done Trayvon? I said if he was already kicking his ass, at least he would have got a shot off first, and we'd be talking about him being killed instead of Trayvon.
Yeah. So let's what I always say is, okay, what are the white racists saying about this thing? Okay, let's just assume that they're correct about what actually happened.
Yeah.
Okay. So Zimmerman chases him down with no authority.
Yeah.
We know that. Right? Trayvon was committing no crime.
Nah, walking back from the store.
Yeah. Maybe he was trespassing, but you have this guy following him down the street for he was already told not to do that.
Yeah.
Okay, and now we know that Trayvon was kicking his ass.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. So, I think I would tell my son to do that.
I have two sons, and I
would tell him that he's not wrong to do that.
Exactly. I have talked to my boys, and I never want my boys to think that Trayvon Martin or Michael Brown were just two little boys who had no control and who were taken off the streets, and I got to watch out for you and daddy's got to protect you forever. No, both of those young men fought.
Yeah.
And they fought for dear life, because that is your instinct human. I don't care what color you are. We are humans. We're part of the same race. I often wish aliens will come out of the sky and attack us, so we'll have to forge together to understand that it's just one of us. Some of us are lighter because of altitude and a less amount of melanin. Other of us were closer to the equator. We have shorter hair because the sun was beating down. You have longer hair because you needed earmuffs. But what we are not is so drastically different that you don't have the inalienable human rights to defend yourself. So I'm very glad that you tell the narrative from that perspective, because in my community, that's not what's being done. We're looking at these kids as victims, and this can happen, and almost more coddling, when I think it's important that young African-American men and women know that to assert your right to live, even if by way of violence, is a right. It's not It's not just an option. It's your right, and it should be your first choice if put in a position where it's your life or someone else's.
I hate the victimhood narrative. I hate it. It actually, what it does,
it creeps into everything. It doesn't just stay.
It's actually white supremacist.
Exactly. It creeps into schools.
Because what you're saying when you say that black people are victims, you're saying is they can't help themselves. And who can help them? Only white people.
Exactly.
That has been, since Reconstruction to the present day, that has been the narrative of white liberals.
So is that narrative as violent, though, or more violent almost than just brutish force from poor whites in the streets or the fear of?
Yeah, I've been saying this for a long time. It is a different kind of violence. It's not a physical violence. You could say it's more profound. It's a cultural and a psychological violence.
Yes, sir.
It is an annihilation of a culture.
Yes, sir.
Right? Because white liberals have been assimilationists since Reconstruction, all the way through the Civil Rights Movement to the present day. You can come to our colleges, but you got to be like us if you're going to be here.
Yeah, which is why you find on Ivy League colleges,
and then you
black
have,
kids.
and so I've been a big critic of the student protests of the last 4 months, but I've been saying over and over again, here's what happens to these kids. They're brought into these classrooms because they're black. And here's another reason, and this has been stated by education people. Those black kids need to be here for the benefit of the white students, because white students benefit from diversity.
Exactly.
Now, you're the one black kid, or maybe there are two black kids in that classroom, right? And you know that's why you're there.
Yeah.
And everybody knows that's why you're there. Would that not make you a little crazy?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a psychological violence that goes on. Assimilationism is not talked about nearly enough. So the Freedmen's Bureau during Reconstruction, civil rights leaders, black and white, King was an arch assimilationist. He gave sermons in the 1950s about black culture. It sounded like the Ku Klux Klan talking.
Wow.
Oh, yeah. He hated rock and roll. He said it was the devil's music.
Well, he was into Jesus. They have that. I'm a rapper.
But
Some of them still hate me.
It was partly his Christianity, but I think it was more that he was an assimilationist and an integrationist.
Gotcha.
That his politics dictated that, right?
Gotcha.
He was opposed to all black music that was not Negro spirituals. Okay, he was. He gave these sermons that sounded like a white racist talking. He said, black people drink too much, they smoke too much, they have sex too much, they think about sex too much.
So he pretty much sounds like every black leader today.
Yes, he does. So his
that ain't no shade on nobody. I love y'all. I want to be able to come to church Sunday with my auntie, even though I don't really believe.
So his major heir politically was Jesse Jackson, and almost no one knows this. In the 1970s, you know what Jesse Jackson did? He organized a whole series of national protests against disco music. Operation Push had all these protests, marches, demonstrations, issued press releases against disco music with the same language that King used against jazz and rock and roll and all the rest of it.
Hating on dumb
Al Sharpton used to have marches against hip hop.
I know old Al.
Yeah, Sharpton, he doesn't like what you do.
Yeah, we've been on the wrong side of the room.
That's right.
Times,
He's been an anti-hip hop from the get-go.
God bless him. And I ain't anti none of these men. They can do what they do, but I'm just saying I don't agree with all of it.
What I'm saying is that they are part of the lineage.
I'm standing behind Thaddeus right now with my hands in the air, y'all. Double fist up.
They are part of the lineage that begins with Reconstruction.
Yes, sir.
Actually, it begins before then. It begins with the abolitionists.
Yes, sir.
White and black, who said, we want to free these people so that they can become good, upstanding, white Christian people.
Gotcha.
The abolitionists hated slave culture.
Gotcha.
They hated what the slaves were doing on the plantations. On their own distinctive culture.
Let's talk about this. When we talk about my wife is from Savannah, Georgia.
I love Savannah. I spent a lot of time there.
Yeah, her family's from Savannah and Hilton Head. And you hear about Geechee people and Gullah people and the traditions they are radically different people. Mm-hmm. They really are. Yep. They talk different. Their ways and customs are different. Some of it downright, I know this didn't come from here. You know, we have traveled enough throughout the Caribbean, not Africa yet, but we've traveled enough for me to see similarities in instances. And even in the way they talk, you can tell that there's a bit of African spiritualism here. There's a bit of something that's not full assimilation didn't happen. Mm-hmm. I see and value that culture. I think it's very important. I hate to see it kind of dying off with the selling of Geechee and Gullah land and you know, kids kind of leaving and not coming back. This culture is what we are losing, have lost, and stand to lose more of if we fully, quote unquote, assimilate, or if we fully integrate. You say King was definitely a proponent for that in the 50s and throughout the 60s. But what about the King that got to the point where he said, I fear I'm integrating my people into a burning house? And if Kings, Jessies, and Sharptons and their assimilation have not been the best for us, who have been the political leaders besides a Malcolm or Elijah or Garvey, or including a Chanty Diop or John Henrik Clark, that have stood against their philosophy at that point in time, or have been more pro, you need to keep who you were, even if by violence?
Langston Hughes.
Okay,
Start
talk
there.
to me. Hold on, talk to me. He's one of my favorites.
The Negro and the Racial Mountain. Everyone should read that essay.
The Negro and the Racial Mountain.
In the 1920s, he wrote this essay, which is essentially what I'm talking about. And Hughes said, yeah, we're different. And yeah, according to white standards, we are, quote, bad.
Yeah.
But you know what? Here's what white people are. As a formal culture, right? Not all white people, but you know, the culture that whiteness is.
Yeah.
It comes from Puritans. It's puritanical.
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
It's anti-human. It restricts personal freedom. It tells you that pleasure is bad. It tells you that work is the only thing you should do.
Yeah.
It tells you that the only good life worth living is in a nuclear family with the same person your entire life.
Yeah.
Dancing is terrible. Music that isn't, you know, spiritual or classical music is all bad. That's the Puritan tradition that created whiteness. And Langston Hughes was one of the first people to say, hey, and W.E.B. Du Bois said the same thing too. In the 20s and 30s, he said something very similar, those two. He says it's not bullshit. It's like, if you want to live that way, go ahead. It's just that a lot of black people have chosen not to.
Gotcha. Okay.
And they established their own distinctive culture because in a very weird way, slavery allowed it, right?
Yeah.
Slavery separated this group of people from the dominant puritanical white culture.
Yeah.
Slaves had no incentive to enter that culture, right? And they were barred from entering it anyway.
Yeah.
And so what they did was, on the plantations, they just made their own culture, which was borrowed in part from West Africa,
yeah,
which had very different ideas about sex and work and dancing and the body and all those things, right? Much more liberated than white people, right? So is it any goddamn surprise that those people invented jazz?
Not to me.
Right. I mean, you got to put two and two together here. It actually comes from slavery. Not that slavery was a good thing, but that it unintentionally allowed those people to develop a distinctive culture that was much more liberated than the white culture.
Absolutely.
So that is the root of all this. And what you see is, beginning with Reconstruction, an attempt over and over and over again by whites and blacks to assimilate those people. Now, you talked about the Gullah culture, which has not been fully assimilated.
Not yet.
We haven't lost entirely.
Let's hope not.
But see, to me, that's a very small... I think it's interesting. I'm much less interested in that than I am in sort of the broad African-American culture, which is its own thing, which you're a part of, which many people are a part of, many white people are a part of now, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is clearly not gone either, right?
Yeah.
So hip-hop, there you go. That's the most prominent example of this now, but we have it over the last 150 years of black people tacitly resisting assimilation by continuing the tropes of this culture, right? In music and movement and language. How much of American vernacular comes from black slang, right?
Bling
Massive
is the
amounts
last
of
thing added. I just
you
thought
have presidents and newscasters and sportscasters using slang that used to be considered just black and just ghetto, right?
Absolutely.
And it goes on and on and on, right? So that made America in some ways worth living in, right? So you have this resistance that goes on just in everyday interactions, in people choosing to listen to particular music, and people talking in particular ways, and people having different attitudes than they're supposed to have about sex and work.
I want to speak to that.
Sure.
I can remember John Henrik Clark saying that in matters of, it's amazing that you take it to a cultural discussion. My mother had 3 children by 2 different men, my biological father and my non-biological father. I've known many people like that. It's never really been a big issue. To my grandmother, who was a devout Christian, it was kind of to them, but I remind her all her brothers and sisters didn't look alike. Then she'd hit me and tell me she hopes her mom comes visit me at night when I'm asleep. But my mom is, has never been looked down on or looked at different. They tried to push her out of high school. She refused to go. But I heard John Henrik Clarke say that in West African tradition, if a woman had 3 kids by 3 different men, they were good men, upstanding men, they hadn't had a problem with them, then those were all her children. Those children were all legitimate. It wasn't a problem. And that's pretty much what I've always seen in my community. And I could imagine how if you were from a Puritan-based culture, that would scare you. And my grandfather used to always say that a lot of white people didn't like you just because they were jealous. And I didn't get that at the time, because to me, white culture had everything. They weren't harassed. They could buy, in your mind economically, they got the big house, the big cars. But he told me, man, look at what you can do, man. You can sit here, you can drink shine, you can party. And I didn't really get it, you know what I mean? But I get it. I get that even in the depths of physical slavery, the human spirit lives and thrives and finds ways to exert itself. And the resistance is in just your nature. Who you are becomes a resistance to the bigger and broader culture.
This is amazing.
You have this country with a rapper, you're like, God,
no, it's amazing. People don't know this stuff the way you do.
Yeah, because I smoke joints and read Twitter. That's what. It's so.
And I'm talking about black academics won't talk to me like this. Like, it's just, oh man.
I don't understand it. I don't, Doc. I don't, because it's so
frustrating.
Yeah, it'd be so liberating if we could all. My aim in life is to, before I die, to just be fully human being, to be human without the tag and the responsibility of representing all black people, all of Americans, all Southerners. And I think that the only way that happens is if you make sure everyone else can be.
Yeah. So back to the family.
Let's get it.
Because everybody loves to talk about the black family and how terrible it is that black people are raised by single mothers. And
we raised by villages.
In some ways it is.
That's a crock.
Say it again?
We're raised by villages. That's a crock. I want to tell people that the whole black single mother narrative, and black families are matriarchal. I'm going to tell you that when you say, women deserve equality, women never had equality in my family because they ran the entire family. Men kind of gave an opinion by counsel. But I was raised by my grandmother, all her sisters and brothers, and my parents and step-parents.
Right, exactly. Yeah. That is the norm. So, and that is a West African tradition, and that was a slave tradition, right? So we know from historical research, some historians have done this research, that slaves had much different ideas about family and sex than whites did. Okay, one of the ideas is what you were saying, that it wasn't a bad thing if you had multiple partners. It wasn't a bad thing if you had a child with this guy and then took up with another guy.
Yeah.
In fact, they thought it was a good thing that children be raised by villages or the community.
Absolutely.
Rather than the nuclear family model, which was the Puritan model, which is 2 people essentially on an island raising these children by themselves with no help from anyone forever.
Weird as fuck.
Well, it's weird
to me.
It is weird. Here's why it's weird. Because that is only in Northern Europe and the United States. You find that, right? People from West Africa and most of the world just didn't have that idea, right? So when the abolitionists found out about this, they were horrified. And that's one of the things they wanted to do. They wanted to get down there to the South, get those people off those plantations so that they could train them to be in nuclear families, and to adopt the Puritan work ethic, which was the other pillar of Puritanism. The Puritan work ethic is not that you should work in order to gain things. It is that work in itself is a virtue. So no matter what you gain from it, no matter how much money you gain from work, you should work all the time. And Martin Luther King talked about this all the time himself. He was a major proponent of the work ethic.
That makes no sense, though, because he's an intellectual.
Intellectuals tend to be quite ascetic. They tend to be kind of anti-body and opposed to the right, because we live in the mind, right? That's what intellectuals are.
I consider myself.
You are. Yeah. So you and I are a little different for intellectuals, right?
Yeah, we actually
we actually do care about our bodies and how they feel and what they look like too,
I'll try to lose a little weight, absolutely.
So that's one of the reasons I think academics don't go the route I've been going, because they're locked in their minds and they sort of have this ascetic view of the world.
Got you.
So now here's an amazing thing that happens. During slavery, beginning in the 1830s, white people in New York City, Philadelphia, in the North, who'd never been to a plantation, start to hear about slaves and how they live and their music and their attitudes toward work and sex and all this. And some of them travel down to the South because they're so fascinated by what they've heard. And they actually observe slaves and how they live and how they behave. And they start to imitate slaves. And some of them...
Hipsters.
Well,
God bless
maybe. Some of them, you're about to know where I'm going in a second. And some of them take burnt cork
Blackface.
and put it on their face. Okay.
Yeah.
So the origins of blackface are in the 1830s. And a lot of Irish, by the way, were part of blackface.
I've heard that.
Yeah. And so, but what you have, and a lot of historians agree with on this, the early blackface minstrels in the 1830s, 40s, and 50s were not anti-black at all.
They were paying homage.
They loved the slaves.
Gotcha.
They were paying homage. What they were doing was an expression of envy and admiration.
I had been told that too.
Had you?
My grandfather told me that.
This is mind-blowing, because this is like when I say this to my students now, or even to black academics who know better, they shout me down.
I went on one of my teenage black nationalism rants on my grandfather. Oh man, it was classic. Like I probably had just like heard a Farrakhan tape. I went off, Much respect to the minister too. That's not shade. I gave him the best I had, and he was the greatest soundboard ever because he come with these real, just hard, practical, real answers. And we were talking about why you watch John Wayne movies and I loved Clint Eastwood's movies. I was talking crap, and he said, "Cuz." I said, "What?" He said, "Cuz." They liked black people at first. That's why they started doing it. And then later on, and he just simply say, later on it turned into something else. And it's not that I didn't believe him. It's not that it didn't make sense, but it really, really was. How are you the only person? You drive dump trucks. How are you the only person telling me this? Why does it feel so? I know you don't lie to me. You're taking care of me. When he was the first person to tell me why lawn jockeys were black. We had just, oh man, look at the lawn jockey in front. Man, that's racist. And he was the first person to tell me there was one time if you weren't a black rider, they wouldn't consider your horse could even win the Kentucky Derby.
Black jockeys, they dominated horse racing.
He was the first person to ever tell me that. He was the first person to tell me about Jack Johnson and just Tiger. I know who Tiger Flowers is right there in right there on Simpson Road or what's now Boone, where they're redoing that whole west side. There's a street called Tiger Flowers. Somebody's going to buy a house on there, and you need to know that was like I think maybe the first or one of the best black middleweight champions ever. So it was this old man who was telling me all this stuff. You now are affirming the things he said with concrete evidence, but we've lost. I mean, I can think of how many people just must thought their grandparents were senile or crazy, but we've lost that. But that's
it's all still going on. I mean, we know that whites love black culture still, right? Maybe more than ever. I mean, we know how many whites consume hip hop, for instance, right? There are more white consumers of hip hop than blacks.
Yeah.
No, so you have the early blackface minstrelsy, the 30s, 40s, 50s. You have clear expressions of admiration for slave culture.
Gotcha.
Then during Reconstruction, it starts to turn, and there is still quite a lot of admiration and envy for black culture in blackface minstrelsy during Reconstruction and after.
Yeah.
But it starts to get nasty. It starts to get demeaning, and it starts to just make fun of blacks more and more.
Basically commercialism.
Well, I don't think it has to do with that. I think it has to do with what envy does to you.
Gotcha.
When you envy somebody, you don't think, oh, it's so great that they have that thing or that they can do that thing or that that's the way they are. You start to resent them, right? Resentment always follows envy.
Gotcha.
And I think that is the root of racism in this country.
So my grandpa was right.
I do. I think it's whites looking at blacks and wishing they were like them.
Well, why don't you just do it though, Doc? Like, why don't you
I was going to say, so is it any wonder that in the heyday of lynching in the 1890s, what did they often do to blacks that they lynched, right?
Cut off the genitalia.
They castrated them, yeah. So it was this obsession with the black penis, black genitalia, black sexuality, right?
Yeah.
I think it's all part of that. It all comes from envy. And, because blacks were seen, rightly so, as being more sexually liberated than whites.
Well,
again, not, don't tell me that I'm being racist. I'm saying that their culture had, to me, according to my values, better and freer attitudes towards sex.
You could close your eyes or change the description and essentially be talking about hippie culture too.
Sure.
So essentially it's a counterculture. You know, to say slave culture paints it, but a working class counterculture was a better alternative to have fun for the general white culture.
And you could say the same thing about the Irish immigrants in the 19th century, Jews, Italians. They were all considered to be sexually liberated, and they were compared to the whites, compared to Protestant whites.
Got you.
Yeah. So I mean, again, it's what your attitude is towards sex and work.
So
first, right? You got to think about this. Like, if sex is bad and work is good, well, then black people have been terrible.
Yeah.
They are inferior.
Yeah.
Well, if you think that work is bad and sex is good, then who exactly is the superior race?
Yeah. I'm definitely going to go with number 2 on that one.
Me too.
I'm going to go with have more fun. Let's figure out how to. I would like for everyone to work less. You know, I think Tesla was right. We have the capacity for everyone to work less and enjoy more and live more. You know, I often wonder why my grandparents would tell me, you know, spend time with your children, have fun. I never understood it, and then my children grew up on me, and I started to understand why.
We got to talk about violent resistance in the 19th century.
We do. Yeah. I'd like to do that.
Because I got to give you some stories, right? Or
I'd like to hear
some
that.
examples.
Could I have a minute to use the restroom?
Oh yeah.
All right. How hard are you on time?
Yeah, I'm here.
All right, Mike Render, Killer Mike. I am back with Thaddeus Russell, American History professor, and the book,
A Renegade History of the United States.
A Renegade History of the United States. He is, let me tell you, I am happy as a little boy who got a BB gun for Christmas. Let me tell you why. I believe that any oppressed people are going to shoot back. and Thaddeus has been doing a wonderful job of educating me on the effects of blacks being willing to push back, to arm themselves, and to fight injustice by force. So for the next 20 minutes we got this man, I'm going to focus on being very quiet and listening to some very specific instances of times that black people rose up in the face of oppression.
Yeah. So one of the untold stories of Reconstruction is that the freedmen were fighting from the very beginning. And so what you have is, beginning in 1865 and the end of the war, you have former Confederates reforming and establishing basically posses that came into these black towns or went onto plantations, and their main objective was to disarm the freedmen, because a lot of the freedmen had guns that they'd either stolen from their masters, or they'd just owned themselves, or they just picked up when the masters left. You had this huge population of freedmen who were well armed and knew how to use those guns, right? And you had these Confederates coming and with the main objective of disarming the slaves, the ex-slaves. And in many cases they were successful. In many cases they killed freedmen. Hundreds and hundreds of ex-slaves were killed during Reconstruction by these posses who became the Ku Klux Klan and other similar organizations. This is the first Klan. There have been 3 clans. This is the first Klan. But what most people don't know is that the freedmen more often than not fought back. They used those guns against the Klan. So often what would happen is, and we have an 1871 congressional investigation. Congress held hearings in 1871 because congressmen were so concerned about the violence in the South. They held these hearings, and they found from many testimonies that often when the freedmen on a plantation would hear that the Klan was approaching, they would organize themselves into small militias, and they would wait in ambush. And when the Klan showed up, they lit them up.
Boom!
Now, they didn't always win. And in fact, probably more often than not, they lost. But in many cases, they won. There are many instances in that congressional testimony of freedmen driving off the Klan who were coming to the plantation to disarm them. The Ku Klux Klan was the first gun control organization in this country.
Repeat that, please.
The Ku Klux Klan was the first gun control organization in this country. No one knows that. It's the truth. That was the main principal objective of the first Ku Klux Klan, was to disarm the slaves.
African Americans that are listening to this, just listen to that.
And if we have time, I do want to talk about sort of the effects of gun control in the last 50 years too, but on blacks. But so you have major race riots throughout Reconstruction. A historian has counted 33 major race riots in which at least one person was killed.
Yeah.
She found that in about 3/4 of those instances, blacks shot back.
Absolutely.
And took lives of whites. Now, again, if you look at the total body count, it is many more blacks killed during Reconstruction than whites, but hundreds of white racists who were trying to disenfranchise blacks lost their lives in that effort because of black willingness to fight back. That's the first thing you need to know about Reconstruction. And that goes all the way from 1865 all the way through the 1870s and into what's called redemption in the 1890s and the birth of Jim Crow and the heyday of lynching.
Yeah.
You have in the 1880s and 1890s, with the end of Reconstruction and what was called redemption, where the white Democrats take control of the state governments and begin to disenfranchise the freedmen and institute segregation, you have the rise of lynching as well. One of the things we also don't know about lynching, or is not told about lynching, is that roughly 1/4 of lynching cases were of black men who were accused of killing a white police officer. Now, of course, in many cases, it may have been made up.
Yeah.
But it's unlikely. It's probably the case that in many cases that was true, that there was tremendous amount of violence against white cops in the South by black people in the 1890s during the heyday of lynching and the dawn of
And rightfully so.
Yeah, most likely, rightfully so. Now, we don't know exactly what happened in each case, but that's tremendous black resistance against segregation and white racist violence. We have in the 1890s, we have several instances of blacks organizing themselves into militias and occupying entire towns. In Decatur, Illinois, in 1894, 100 black men armed themselves with rifles and occupied the center of the town when a black man was accused of raping a white woman. They were worried that he was going to be lynched for good reason.
Yeah.
They organized themselves into a militia and occupied, as a military force, Decatur, Illinois, for 3 days. And they saved his life.
So the Minutemen in Oregon got that plot.
That's right.
From the brothers in Decatur, Illinois.
That's right.
I just, man, I'm gonna let you keep it. You just making my day here. You're making my day.
Only one historian has written about that, as far as I know. In 1892, more people know about this. In 1892, Ida B. Wells. Everyone knows about Ida B. Wells.
Come on, Ida B.
Yep. So everybody knows, or most people know, that she advocated armed resistance.
Ida B. Wells
advocated that every black family have a Winchester rifle in their house.
I want to ask you about another woman too, but
okay,
keep on.
So how did Ida B. Wells come to that realization? Because Ida B. Wells was middle class. She didn't really, she wasn't really of the population that was fighting back generally. She, in 1892, this is the height of lynching. This is when 2 black people on average were lynched every week in the United States. She looked around, she read newspaper reports, and she saw that just in 1892, just in 1 year, just a few months in 1 year, that there were at least 5 instances of attempted lynchings of black men across the South and in the Midwest that were foiled when large groups of black men and women got their rifles and shot back.
Come on.
Yeah. So you have Paducah, Kentucky, Jacksonville, Florida, cases in Georgia on plantations, in Alabama on plantations, of black people organizing themselves with guns and stopping lynchings from happening. And that's what inspired Ida B. Wells to launch her anti-lynching campaign, which was a major component of the NAACP's politics in the 20th century. And the NAACP began, after it was formed in the 1900s, began keeping statistics on lynchings. And this is a very important set of numbers everyone should look at. It's readily available. You can Google it. Lynchings, the number of lynchings is 2 per week for about 10 years in the 1890s, on average. That
2
many.
per week?
2 per week on average in the 1890s.
1,000 men.
Yeah. Okay, so that's the peak. Okay, and then it continues, it sort of plateaus, it continues at that level through the early 1900s and the 1910s. Then what you have is, beginning in 1919, you have major race riots. The most famous one is in Chicago, Red Summer. This was essentially a mass pogrom of whites against blacks on the streets of Chicago, but blacks fought back. There were many white casualties in that fight as well.
Yeah.
Then from 1919 to 1922, 1921, excuse me, you have several major similar race riots. Whites attacking blacks for the most part. In every single case, blacks fought back with guns, with fists, and killed many white people. Now, every single case.
Absolutely.
Between 1919 and 1921. The big one is Tulsa in 1921.
Where they dropped a bomb on that.
The Tulsa black community was very successful.
Black Wall Street.
Yep, and had a very successful business district, an autonomous, independent, successful black business district. The whites hated it. Literally launched an invasion of the business district in Tulsa, dropped a bomb from a plane on it, invaded it with guns, blacks fought back, major casualties on both sides. Okay.
Say that again. Blacks fought back. That's not the story that's told in our community.
No, it's not, because blacks have to be the victims so that we, white people, can take care of them.
Man, I like you. I like you a lot.
But let me tell you this. Here's the thing, though. So what if this is all true, and you have blacks fighting back, but blacks get killed more often than whites?
Yeah.
Okay, that's true.
Yeah.
So what if it's just that? That's not good enough, is it? We want to know what the results of this are. Here's the deal. So, as I said, lynching peaks in the 1890s and stays at that level through the 1900s and 1910s.
Yep.
According to the NAACP statistics on lynching, the number of lynchings per year in the United States declines beginning in what year? 1922. The year after the black people of Tulsa raised up their rifles and shot a whole bunch of white crackers.
Wow. The year my grandpa was born, too.
following several major race riots in which black people fought back.
Exactly.
I don't think it's a coincidence.
Yeah.
Right? I think that black resistance contributed to the decline in lynching, which basically disappeared in the 1960s.
Thank you for saying that. Friend of mine named Shelley Winters is a black conservative. SCLC fired or removed from their post and announced twice on the local news in Atlanta that they were going to retrain the current president. Well, he's not currently, he was a president then, because he had said that blacks need to, in the lieu of the police killings, need to arm themselves. And they said they were going to take him off and retrain him. And Shelley made a wonderful post where he talked about the reason that you don't see, or the reason they call it a Mexican standoff. If everybody in the room has a gun, everybody all of a sudden understands they don't want to die. The reason that policemen will engage black kids at a pool party differently than they'll engage the Hells Angels is because they know only one group is willing to fight and die and kill. You know, most important, when people say, I'll die for the cause. That's one thing. But when people know you'll kill for your cause, that creates a whole nother set of pressure. So thank you for saying that. I think it's important that people know that it's natural to push back when you're being oppressed. I want to, if you know of her at all, see someone I've come to recently know and I've fallen in love with. I'll give you a quote from her. One of her quotes says, "Oh misery, I have drunk thy cup of sorrow to its dregs, but I am still a rebel." Her other quote that I love, because I didn't think a black woman, she was black, her name was Lucy Parsons. They were, you know what I'm talking about. Yeah. She was she was beyond abolitionist. She was an anarchist.
Yeah, she was an anarchist radical. Yeah.
Exactly. Her husband was killed falsely. Yep. He was hanged. She was married to a white man.
Yeah.
But listen to what she says. "Let every dirty, lousy tramp arm themselves with a revolver or knife and lay in wait on the steps of the palaces of the rich." And that's not you middle class people, because you don't live in palaces. So I'll start over. "Let every dirty, lousy tramp arm himself with a revolver or knife and lay in wait on the steps of the palaces of the rich and stab or shoot their owners as they come out. Let us kill them without mercy and let it be a war of extermination." That's not the narrative you usually hear when you hear about docile black women. That's not the narrative you usually hear about Ida B. You don't usually hear about Ida B. Wells saying, at the risk of lynching, arm yourselves. How important have radical black women, we talked about it a little earlier, but if you know of Lucy's personally, how important has she been, or is that philosophy, or black women been in the armed resistance to oppression period?
Oh, I mean, we have evidence of black women fighting back with guns, with fists, with knives, with teeth, with fingernails since slavery. You know, there's no question about it. Harriet Tubman had a rifle for good reason.
And a revolver, from what I hear.
Yeah. Sure. So gun control recently.
Give it to
meaning in the last 50 or so years, right? So, do you know the origins of gun control in this country?
What I know is a bunch of black people showed up in berets and leather jackets in the state capitol in California.
I figured you would know this. Okay. You had to know
Ronald
this.
Reagan wanted to pass gun control.
So the Black Panthers from my hometown, and I was raised about 4 blocks from the Black Panthers headquarters. I think they had the right idea in Oakland in the 1960s, and they started these armed patrols because there was tremendous brutality by the police against the black residents of Oakland, an almost all-white police force. They did these armed patrols where they would just drive around Oakland, and when they saw a police officer pulling over a black man or had him on the side of the road, they got out of their cars, walked over with rifles slung over their shoulders, and watched. But they made their presence felt.
Gotcha.
As armed people, possibly with the willingness to use those arms. What happened in response was the first major gun control law at the state level in 1968, which was passed by a Republican legislature and Republican Governor Ronald Reagan. That, my friends, is the origin of gun control in this country. It is not a liberal cause. It's not a non-racist cause. The origins of gun control are completely racist. Thoroughly.
Talk to me now. Okay. Preach.
So that was the first state major gun control law. It was used as a model for the first national omnibus gun control law. Its roots are really in opposition to black armed resistance, or black self-defense is what I would call it.
Gotcha.
Gun control originally is anti-black self-defense. So what we have since then is most black people live in cities.
Yes.
Since the 1960s.
I was going to say now. Now that's true.
Yep. Well, for the last 50 years.
Yeah.
Where gun control laws are the most powerful. Okay.
They are.
Now,
they are.
Who does gun control take guns from? It doesn't take it from criminals, because criminals break the law anyway. That's
Absolutely.
the whole point.
Absolutely.
So what you're left with is criminals with the guns.
Yep.
And people who want safety and security and would like to defend themselves with guns but can't, disarmed.
Yeah.
Right. And so we talk a lot about...
these people also are looked at as though they're criminals by many occupying police forces.
Of course, yeah.
Okay.
So what you have...
you got criminals with guns. You have an occupying force with guns. You have people who deserve safety and to own them who cannot.
So we have all sorts of discussion, and I think it's important discussion about black-on-black crime. It's a fact that most black people who are murdered in this country are murdered by black people.
Pause. Isn't it also a fact that about the same rates, all the white people that are murdered are by white people?
Sure.
Yeah, because you tend to kill the people you live in close proximity to.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
True for Asians,
my
true
point,
for Latins.
My point is, I think what's implicit in that often is that, black people are all criminals, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Now, no people, no culture is monolithic, and that's certainly true for black people, right?
This is true.
So here's the thing about black people, just like all people, is that there's a lot of them who don't like criminals and don't want, bad, violent, crazy people in their communities with guns.
Don't want it.
And they find that the police force doesn't do a good job of protecting them.
They don't.
The state doesn't do a good job of protecting them.
At all.
But here's the problem with gun control. They can't do it themselves because they are not allowed to have guns.
Thank God.
So here's what I'm going to say. The gun control has in large part contributed to black-on-black violence, crime, and murder.
Wow. You have said something that I have heard whispered and said many times by black men.
Because I
in
think
private conversations.
It would be a very, very good thing if people like you could own and use guns in your communities.
Yeah.
I think the Huey P. Newton Gun Club, do you know about them in Dallas?
No, I've heard of them, but I don't know about them. But I've heard about them.
So the Huey P. Newton Gun Club in Dallas, Texas, was established by sort of a loose coalition of some new Black Panthers, but just a lot of black people, men and women, by the way, a lot of women in the Huey P. Newton Gun Club.
Gotcha.
Who are just saying what I just said, which is that we need to be able to use guns to protect ourselves from the police and from black criminals. And so what they do is they train people, anyone who wants to come train with them, they will train to use guns responsibly, which is another thing that we don't have. We don't have sort of organized gun clubs. Yeah, Armed Black Movement. Yeah. Check out Huey P. Newton Gun Club.
I am.
So what you have is you have people who they march in the streets of Dallas with guns and they know how to use them.
Yeah, absolutely.
These are not crazy criminals.
No.
You know, I feel much safer with people like that with guns than with just the criminals having the guns.
Luckily, in cities like Dallas, Montgomery, Birmingham, Houston, Atlanta, blacks can own guns.
Exactly.
And I encourage black people to own guns. Everywhere I go, as often as I can, I encourage that. I am a member of the National Rifle Association. Some people do not wish to be, and that's fine. But there's a young man named Colin Noor who is a spokesman for them. He's an attorney. He's a wonderful shot. He's a wonderful human being, and he makes a lot of common sense. If you guys are around Google or YouTube, make sure you Google Colin. He's one. The Huey P. Newton Gun Club is one I've heard about but don't know about, but I'm definitely going to look them up. And just very quickly, I encourage black people who are interested in shooting to form shooting clubs.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I bought my wife a Ruger, just a little cheap gun, for till she gets used to it. She's used to shotguns, but this is her first handgun. She's practicing and playing around with now. She'll have a Glock in a few months, but I think it's important that people know how to shoot. You know, I've often had, debates with people when I say simply like, if all the food and water stopped tomorrow, if the drugstore stopped, you wouldn't even know how to hunt or fish to kill something to eat. You know, you wouldn't know if all the lights went out and everything happened and purge was real, you couldn't even fortify yourself in your home and protect yourself for a night.
Right.
You know, and I think that is important.
Yeah, with gun control, only the criminals have guns.
Yeah. So essentially, the Klan only wanted them to have guns and gun control after the turn of the century. And in the 60s, Reagan wanted only the state to have guns. I think it's important, too, that people understand, if black guns are taken or were taken or are being taken, it won't be long before poor whites' guns are taken. It won't be long. Oftentimes what I've found is that policy for black people is a prototype for how to, run it on up the ladder. And I think that owning guns in this country, period, is a precious right for the proletariat to be able to own guns.
Yeah.
So, but that's just my spiel.
Tell your liberal friends this, though.
I do all the time. I'll step off my soapbox. Is there anything else besides your book? And again, name your book, please.
A Renegade History of the United States.
A Renegade History of the United States. Besides that, where should black people go looking? Like I just told them about Lucy Parsons. We talked about Ida B. Wells' support of Winchester rifles. We know about Harriet. We've known that many lynchings were in response to black men that had finally had enough and finally took a bad cop off the face of the earth. Where else can we look? Like, I'm young, I'm hungry, I want to know more from a resistance standpoint. Where do I begin looking? And once I find out, like, where do I talk about this stuff? Where do I come sign up for your class?
Yeah, so, okay. First, I have 2 articles I've written about this for Reason Magazine.
Okay.
If they look me up on Reason Magazine. One on the racist history of gun control,
Yes.
and the other on the history of the use of armed resistance in the civil rights movement.
Yeah.
On Reason Magazine. The other is I am launching an independent online and in-person university.
Okay.
It's called Renegade University.
It's not like Master P's University.
Maybe, I don't know.
It's just a school loan. You just take a loan. No. I like Renegade University. It sounds like something I'll sign up for.
Yeah, so we're going to be... Yeah,
Tell me about it.
Well, it's going to be me teaching these courses, the courses that I've been teaching in colleges, but not for the public. And
I want in.
Good. I'd love to have you.
I want in.
You're my ideal student, as a matter of fact. I'm not kidding.
Thank you.
So, yeah, we're launching that in the summer, most likely. And it's going to be a mix of online courses and lectures and seminars. And also I'm going to do in-person seminars in various cities. And I'd love to do one in Atlanta, actually.
I'd love to host you.
There's a lot of interest for people in Atlanta to do it. So, and we're going to be talking about all this and all the stuff that's in A Renegade History of the United States. So.
Well, thank you. This conversation has been one of my best this week.
Awesome. Thank you.
I really, really, really appreciate it.
It's been one of the best of my life. I mean it. I really mean it.
I really hope you get to come back. I really hope I do get to take you to the strip club for real. And I just thank you. It's been, I have so enjoyed learning over the past couple of hours, and I really look forward to having more honest conversation with you as we've exchanged numbers. I hope it's not our last conversation.
Cool, man. Thank you so much,
Thank you so
Mike.
much, Thaddeus.
This is the Unregistered Podcast, and I'm Thaddeus Russell. To become a patron of the show and have access to bonus episodes, AMAs, and the Unreported News Analysis Show, go to patreon.com/unregistered. Thanks for listening.